morning. Welcome to our second session of our community day. We welcome James and Dr. Lux from VA.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining in. I'm glad y'all can make it during these holiday seasons. Yeah, I hope you all are nice and warm inside. So, yeah, my name is James Hirsch. I am from the research department at the Palo Alto Veterans Affairs. We are located at the Sierra Pacific Myrick Center, more specifically. I work with Dr. Lutz, who is the project director for our research study, which is the Improving Older Veterans' Ability to Manage Life Stress. And today we are going over our topic that Dr. Lutz will go over with you all today. So here is Dr. Julie Lutz, everybody.
Morning, everybody. Thanks, James, for the introduction. I'm gonna give a presentation today about something that I know has been impacting all of us over the past couple years now, which is COVID-19. And I'm going to be mainly focusing on areas in which COVID-19 may contribute to stress for older adults in particular. Some of these relevant to all ages. And a big theme that I want to make sure that I touch on are ways that others have found to positively cope with that stress or positively adapt to that stress, and to hopefully give you all some tips and tricks and ideas of things that you can do to really foster a good quality of life despite some of these current event stressors that have been happening over the past couple of years. I really like an interactive presentation. So feel free during the presentation, if you have any questions, post them in the chat box. I'll try to keep an eye on it, and I have James also keeping an eye on it so he can interrupt me if there's something I miss. And every now and then I might ask a question, and if you're used to using Zoom, if you can use like the thumbs up buttons or the raise hand buttons sometimes when I ask questions, I'm happy to make this as interactive and useful as possible. All right, first I got to get through some of the basic disclosures I just need to let you know about. A lot of my work and the work that went into this presentation is supported by the VA, and specifically by a research grant within the VA. Of course, this presentation was created by myself, so the views expressed in this presentation are my own, and don't necessarily represent official views of the VA or federal government. And just to give you a little background about me and expand a little bit on what James was mentioning, I am what's called a clinical geropsychologist, which means I'm a psychologist who specializes in aging and problems related to later life. And I work at the Sierra Pacific Mental Illness Research, Education, and Clinical Center, which is located at the Palo Alto VA. And I currently work as a project director for a treatment study of a telephone-based treatment for older veterans. And the principal investigator is Dr. Sherry Boudreau. And I'll mention a little bit about the study as well as other opportunities to be involved in research at the end. I just wanted to give you a little background on myself so that you kind of know where I'm coming from here. All right. So for today, I'm going to start off, a lot of this presentation is based in research. And there's actually been a fair amount of research on older adults' experiences with COVID-19, not just experience with the virus itself, but how folks' lives have been impacted by changes related to COVID-19. And a lot of that research is based on older adults' self-report of what they've experienced. And I think it's really helpful to outline that and really take a look at what people are saying they themselves are experiencing. And then next, I'm going to go over coping with COVID-19 related stressors. And again, a lot of the research on this is based on people reporting what they've done that they've found worked for them. And then I'm gonna, like I said, I'll talk to you a little bit about the research study that's available, as well as other opportunities to potentially receive support if you feel you may need additional supports for any of these stressors. And at the very end, of course, I want to acknowledge the folks that I work with and who have really supported this presentation. And I'll provide my contact information for anybody who has further questions later on. All right, so to jump right in, like I said, I want to start by talking about what older adults have reported they've experienced related to COVID-19. And if you want, if there's something that really resonates with you and you'd like to mention it in the chat box, you're welcome to, even if it's not necessarily a question. Or if there's something that you feel isn't represented on these slides that you think is a really significant impact of COVID-19, also feel free to share that. So first, I just want to recognize all of the various life changes that have been brought about by this pandemic. Some of these things have been more or less impactful at different times throughout the pandemic. For example, the 6 feet apart social distancing restrictions have maybe lessened now, but changes in life have happened across all of these areas since the pandemic started. One is wearing masks around. That's had a lot of implications that maybe we didn't realize at first. One of them can be social. So when you're wearing a mask, it's really hard to see facial expressions. It's really hard for some people who have hearing difficulties, who may be dependent on facial cues and even reading lips to some extent. Wearing masks has made that harder. So that can be a big barrier to social situations. The physical distancing, of course, has been huge in regard to social life. At the height of the pandemic, having to space out 6 feet away from others, limits to indoor social activities for a really long time, group size limits being restricted in terms of how many people you can meet with at a time, what types of meetings you can have, and travel limits. Travel is a really significant part of a lot of people's lives. There were also a lot of medical and health implications of COVID-19. The obvious ones being the risk related to contracting COVID-19, but the pandemic and the efforts to reduce the spread also led to a lot of other medical implications. So decisions about receiving vaccines and boosters and when to do that and which ones to receive and all of that. A lot of doctors' offices and hospitals also significantly reduced the amount of appointments available and when people could come in and how. And so that led to a lot of different procedures for medical visits, which could be stressful and reduced a lot of the times availability for appointments and procedures. So in that way, COVID-19 impacted other health problems in addition to the virus itself. And then there were a variety of legal and public and economic changes in people's work for those still working, changes in benefits, changes in what the requirements were to receive some of those benefits or to continue work, financial changes that we're still experiencing related to that. So you can see there's a lot of potential stressors brought about by this pandemic. Another thing I want to acknowledge here is, as somebody who works with older adults a lot, I saw a lot of concerning messages being sent out there into the world about older adults and the pandemic. A lot of ageism represented out there. Older adults throughout the pandemic, especially the early stages, you can see this research is from 2020. So right as things were happening, that older adults were more likely to be separated and quarantined from others compared to younger adults. Older adults were seen as higher risk and more fragile. And there were a lot of patronizing policies that were enacted, and often a lot of policies that kind of minimized risk to older adults while focusing on maximum benefit for younger adults. A lot of people reported a view of the pandemic as an older person problem. And that affected a lot of younger folks' behaviors, kind of dismissing risks to older people. And then, several older adults reported feeling like they were marginalized in this situation. And one area that I find particularly important in my own research is social connection with others. And one of the big impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic has been a concern about social isolation, and particularly in older adults. Research showed that the level of social isolation people experienced was related to a number of different factors, to sex, education, chronic conditions. So people who had more chronic health conditions ended up becoming more isolated. People who had unmet caregiving needs ended up becoming more isolated during the pandemic. Those who lived alone were less likely to see others in person, particularly in the height of the physical distancing. And then there's been actually some really good research conducted in the San Francisco Bay Area by geropsychologists and other geriatrics experts around here. This one was actually a little bit hopeful. It did recognize that more than half of older adults in their sample reported that loneliness worsened due to COVID-19. But what they found was that there was it was a dip in social connection, or thinking of it the other way around, kind of a spike in loneliness when shelter in place began, but that improved over time since the start of shelter in place. And so, I find that hopeful because it shows some resilience and how there may be, stressors and events that lead to poorer social connection, but that things can kind of stabilize and start coming back to normal. And what I'm hoping is some of the information that I can provide later in this presentation can help foster that getting back to feeling socially connected, to feeling a little less stress. All right. So I mentioned that there's been research kind of asking older adults, what have you experienced during COVID-19? What have been the main stressors for you during this time? And I want to present you some of those results. So one study here at the top that asked about perceived threats and challenges during this time generally found these themes in responses. The first, of course, was contracting COVID and the dangers of COVID itself. Another theme was other health challenges. Like I mentioned, COVID-19 didn't just affect COVID-19, it affected other health issues and health treatment. People reported that the physical and social distancing was a stressor, feeling less connected with other people. A lot of folks mentioned using technology. I think we all became a lot more familiar with Zoom and Skype and Teams and all of these other ways of connecting and social media than we were before the pandemic. But that all comes with a learning curve. I'm sure the first time any of you use Zoom, you're like, what's going on here? What do I click? How do I do this? There is a learning curve there, and that can be a stressor. Some people reported that living arrangements were a stressor. So, if you have to navigate physical distancing within your living arrangements, if you have uncertain living arrangements, that can be a stressor. People reported financial issues for, a variety of reasons. And then people reported media messages. I'm sure any of us can recognize that there's been a lot of negative themes to news and various media since the pandemic started, and it can be very overwhelming. And so those are some of the challenges and some of the stressors. Again, there is some hopefulness here. Because one study found that though, these stress symptoms have been more severe during the pandemic for older adults, that overall, older adults have actually exhibited less psychological distress during this time than younger adults. On average, of course, there are individual differences here, but it really highlights how resilient older adults can be. Throughout your lifetime, you build up coping strategies and you foster relationships that are close to you. And so there's a lot to pull from in terms of resilience. And then I'm going to start kind of slowly transitioning here to, I'm still going to talk a little bit about the stressors, but I'm also going to start bringing up here some of the things that people mentioned have helped them cope or kind of counteracted some of the stress during COVID. So I love this study that really paid attention to both. So these researchers asked older adults to report what are some stressors that you've experienced, but also what are some joys that you've experienced during this time, and what have you done or what have you found that's been related to feeling better or having greater well-being during this time. And some themes here for the stressors were the restrictions, worry about others, and again, here we see the isolation and loneliness. And I will highlight that in a lot of these studies I'm going to mention, you'll see repeats of themes. So it's really clear that these are things that have been relevant for a lot of people. Some themes for the common joys have been relationships with other people. For those who have found ways to maintain close relationships during this time, that's been hugely beneficial in coping. People reported the online and digital contact with others. So if a person can kind of get through that learning curve and embrace using some of these technologies, they find that it leads to a lot more positive experiences. And then a lot of people reported either finding new ways or developing new hobbies and activities. COVID may have interrupted being able to do some of the hobbies and activities people were used to. But I saw so much of people being really creative and finding ways to still do the things that they love to do. And then finally, people reported that some of the things related to better well-being during this time included faith, and that's a variety of types of faith, exercise and self-care, So, you know, people who maybe found ways to exercise despite the physical distancing restrictions, people who were able to find ways to still carry out self-care despite the restrictions, really found that related to better well-being. And then a lot of people mentioned nature. You know, I found during the pandemic, I would go out on walks around the neighborhood, and you know, I really liked in the fall colors, or in the spring, seeing the blooms, and even that can be associated to greater well-being and even feeling more of a connection with the world and a connection with others. So I'm going to pause for a second there and just give you all a chance. If there are any questions right now, you can feel free to put them in the chat box, or even, you know, I can give a couple minutes to unmute yourself. We'll just pause for a moment and I'll continue on if there are no questions. All right. I know I speak fast sometimes, so definitely if you feel you missed anything or have any questions, let us know in the chat box. So like I said, I'm transitioning now to talking more about the coping and kind of the positive things that can help with some of these stressors. Various studies, kind of like the ones asking about stressors related to COVID-19, also asked in the opposite direction about positive coping strategies folks use that they found worked for them. And again, here you're going to see overlap of some themes across these studies. So one big theme, again, is the exercise and outdoor activities. Something people mentioned was adjusting or even just setting a daily schedule. And that's something that a lot of research has shown is really helpful for fighting off depression and low mood, is just, you know, saying, I'm going to get out of bed at this time every day. I'm going to have my coffee and my breakfast, or I'm going to take my walk. And having that routine gives you some consistency, which helps you kind of mentally maintain this kind of productive outlook onto the day. People reported using various techniques to try to adjust their outlook during this stressful time. So mindfulness involves finding a way to be in the present moment in a way that's not judgmental in any way, and finding a way to kind of let worries about the past or the future kind of fall aside and be present. People used various relaxation techniques to kind of reduce stress and improve outlook. A lot of people mention, again, the importance of social connections and finding ways to foster those. Again, another overlapping theme here from what we previously talked about was new and creative activities. And we mentioned the negative media messages people reported, and some of the positive coping strategies folks have talked about is limiting exposure to news, which really gets at limiting exposure to all of that negative messaging. It's not you have to cut it off, put your head in the sand, or go, I don't hear what's going on, but just not letting yourself be dragged into just constantly receiving those negative messages, maybe limiting your amount of time consuming news each day. And then, you know, a variety of other things that people found. You know, everybody has their own individual interests and values. These were some of the most commonly reported themes, but there are a lot of other things that people may have found helped them cope. And in fact, if there's something you don't see up here that you found was really helpful for you, I really encourage you to share it in the chat box because it may be helpful for somebody else. Another time I gave a presentation similar to this, somebody mentioned that for them, it was their pets. Having, you know, a dog or a cat that one was caring for and kind of also receiving love from, that was huge in helping them cope. So yeah, feel free to share if there's anything that's not up here. In another study, 4 of the main themes that came up for helping people be more resilient included acceptance, which is really related to the mindfulness that I was talking about earlier. People again reported exercise, humor. You know, as human beings, we use humor in a lot of ways to cope with stressful situations. So finding ways to find humor. And then a lot of other people reported that helping others helped them feel more resilient. You know, that could be in a variety of ways. And it helps them feel more connected and like they had a purpose. So it might be through volunteering. I'm sure a lot of you heard the stories of people making masks for hospital staff when supplies were low. Just sewing masks with whatever fabric they had. And that was this hugely effective way to be part of the solution and feel connected to others. Or even donating if people maybe don't have a way to be directly involved themselves, donating could be hugely supportive. So I'm seeing people's ideas come into the chat. Agreeing with the pet thing. Yeah, I got my cat a couple months before the pandemic started, and really having him around was a big deal for me. Getting lost in a great book. Yes. Having entertainment that you can kind of get lost in, it is very helpful. And a lot of entertainers even went online and tried to provide opportunities to engage in those things online when, for example, like live entertainment wasn't possible. Game night with the family. Yeah, that's, you know, again, finding a way to do enjoyable activities and connect with other people. Yeah. And even joining community day. Yeah, being involved in this and being able to just even experience something with other people can be really helpful. Thanks for those ideas. Yeah. All right. So, oh, sorry, I'm flipping too far ahead. Okay. So I mentioned what people have done throughout the pandemic to cope with the stress. I also wanted to offer some tools that are available. I did do a presentation last month, I think, or 2 months ago, also on stress, not COVID related. And I presented some of these. So if you saw my last presentation, some of these might be familiar, but you know, I work at the VA, and one of the things that VA has really effectively done is developing mobile apps that are based on real evidence-based interventions and treatments for stress, and developing these apps that are useful. They have a pretty usable kind of interface. They're free to anybody. You don't have to be a veteran. You don't have to be a certain age. They're really mindful about privacy with these apps. And 2 of the really helpful ones for COVID related stress are COVID Coach, which includes modules that help with all sorts of types of COVID related stressors, including creating a like habits for a day, like I was talking about earlier, and managing stress and things like that. And then Mindfulness Coach is one of their most popular apps, and it really walks you through how to do mindfulness, what mindfulness is, There's some educational modules about why mindfulness is helpful, as well as exercises that you can do to be mindful. And so even there's recordings and this voice will lead you through a mindfulness exercise so you can really get practice, and you can even track your stress levels as you go along. So I really encourage you. I think they're available on Android and iPhone. If you just search COVID Coach or Mindfulness Coach, you should be able to find it pretty easily. So, I encourage you to take advantage of those resources if you think they would be helpful. And then there are some other self-help resources that are available at mentalhealth.va.gov. Some of those are veteran-specific resources, but if you find something that might be helpful for you, feel free to take advantage of that. And then I want to introduce maybe another stress reducing exercise right now that we can all do together. Again, if you saw my previous presentation, you'll recognize this because this is one of my favorite things to teach. Let's start off with this. Yeah, I'm seeing a thumbs up. People probably know what I'm going to get to, but if any of you remember the name Apollo Ono from Winter Olympics, it was several years back, but he was a very successful speed skater for the US, won lots of medals. During the Winter Olympics, a lot of people paying attention to him and watching his races. But they caught him doing something that seemed strange for an Olympic athlete, which was he would yawn a lot before a race. Yeah, Apollo Ono. Journalists were perplexed. It's like, we typically think yawning is either when you're bored or when you're tired. And you wouldn't think that either of those would be relevant when you're about to compete in an Olympic race, right? You're probably not bored and hopefully not too tired. And so he was asked why he was doing that. And he said, actually, I found that this helps me relax and concentrate for the race. And what we know actually from studies of humans and actually from a lot of different species of animals is that that's true. Yawning brings oxygen to your brain in a way that really helps to foster relaxation, and beyond just relaxation, also helps improve focus and concentration. So how can we kind of capitalize on that for ourselves when we're stressed out? What you can do is you can actually fake yawn. And what typically happens if you fake yawn for a few seconds is you'll start real yawning. And it feels a little silly to start with. I'm going to have you all try it at home. I'm the only person on video, so it's a little nerve-wracking for me because it does look silly at first. But I hope you all will do it with me. I want you to yawn as big as you can, like even do the fold, the stretch, make the sound. I'll do it with you. And we're going to do that for a few seconds. And while we're doing that, I'd like you to really try to pay attention to what you feel in your body. And even like if you notice anything like mentally as you're doing it, and it's only going to take like a minute. So we're going to start in a second here when I say go. And again, just keep fake yawning and see what happens. All right. So ready, go. There was a real one for me. Oh. 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 Okay. So you can, if you can, if you're not yawning uncontrollably right now, you can stop. Does anybody want to unmute themselves or share in the chat box what they experienced? Hopefully, I'm not sure if you're able to unmute yourselves. If you can, go ahead.
I can start first. I yawned 4 or 5 times. I felt a little ridiculous at first, and then, but the 6th time, it was a real yawn. It actually induced real yawn, and I feel a little bit more relaxed. So thank you, Dr. Lux.
Yeah, it's really fascinating that you said it was the 6th time, because, you know, it's individual for everybody. For me, I yawn really easily. So it usually happens sooner, but they say kind of on average after about 6 is when you start getting the real yawn.
Oh, really? Wow. So I'm average, Dr.
You're
Lux.
right. You're right on there. A little bit of tingling along the spine. Yeah. For some people, that might be how they experience kind of a little bit of a release or a relaxation in the muscles back there. For me, I carry a lot of stress in my neck and shoulders. And I start to feel like my shoulders, which are usually like this, it feels like start to feel a little looser. Yeah. Anything else? All right. So yeah, I really love teaching that skill, because it's something, it's just so out there. People don't know about it, and it does seem a little silly at first, but it can be so effective, and it doesn't take a lot of time. Like, I think that was less than 1 minute that we did that exercise. And it doesn't require equipment. It doesn't cost anything. You can do it just about anywhere. I wouldn't do it like while you're actively driving your car or something like that. And people might look at you a little funny if you do it in front of a whole bunch of people. But, you know, if you have a private moment, since it doesn't take very long, you know, you could do it. And you don't have to have anything with you or any money to be able to do it. So, especially in times where you're feeling particularly tense, or maybe even so stressed out that it's hard to focus, maybe this is something you can try. All right. And then I want to talk about just kind of based on what we know can be really effective in dealing with stress, and particularly depression and anxiety. You know, a lot of how we experience the world is an interaction between thoughts that we have, physical experiences that we have, and our behavior and actions. And so I'm going to use the example here of social isolation and coping with that, but really this is something that can be applied to any kind of stressor or negative experience or negative feelings or emotions. And the idea is that these negative emotions stem from this interaction between these 3 aspects. And if you can kind of stop that cycle somewhere along those 3 things, you can help improve your adapting and your coping, and help reduce some of those negative feelings or negative experiences. So with this example of social isolation, there are a lot of things that can contribute to feeling isolated and can kind of actually keep a person isolated. So for somebody who is feeling isolated, maybe they experience thoughts like, what if I'm a burden on my family and friends? Or what if they don't want to be around me? Or maybe they're thinking, nobody cares about me. You can imagine how that would contribute to some really negative feelings. And it could also contribute to some of these other things. So physically, on one hand, somebody might feel reduced energy or reduced motivation or feel really lethargic. On the other hand, maybe somebody experiences more of like an anxiety feeling, like feeling really tense and on edge. And really, if you feel that way, if you're worried about being a burden on others, or you think nobody cares about you, you're going to be less likely to seek out interactions because you're going to feel really bad about those interactions. And so maybe avoiding them and staying isolated. And you can see how it can become a cycle of these things. So how can you address one of these along the way? You don't necessarily have to change all three to experience a change. Even if you can interrupt the cycle at one point on there, you can experience a really big difference. So if you're having thoughts of like being a burden or nobody cares about you, some of the little ways that you can try to change perspective is when you recognize yourself having a thought like that, think, what's the evidence for that? I think a lot of times we start to feel bad about ourselves, but if you pause and you think, what's the evidence out there? What have I actually experienced in the past? You'll think of times when people have told you they care about you or have shown you that you're not a burden. And so taking the time to do that may even help break that cycle. One thing I really like to say is if I told a loved one, like my best friend or my spouse or my sibling or parent or child, that I was feeling this way, what would they say to me? Because chances are they say, no, I don't see you as a burden, or of course I care about you and I love to see you. So that can help kind of interrupt some of those thoughts that can happen automatically when we're feeling down. For the physical aspect, if you're experiencing kind of lack of energy, or on the other hand, the tenseness, using something like mindfulness or a relaxation technique can help you kind of counteract some of those physical experiences, bring down the tension. And then on the behavioral side, if you find that you're just avoiding interactions, maybe because of some of these thoughts or some of those physical experiences, any small thing that you can do to engage in something that is positive for you will be helpful. It doesn't have to be huge to start with. It can be any small step. So during COVID, especially, finding any small way to connect with another person in a way that's safe and feasible. So calling somebody by phone, doing a Zoom call or a Skype call or whatever, even sending letters, people found could help break that cycle. And again, finding any small pleasant thing to do, taking a walk around your block, if that's pleasant for you. So these are ways that you can help try to kind of break that cycle. All right, and I'm being mindful of time here, just a couple more slides, and then I'll go to questions. So we've talked about ways that people have found help them cope with COVID-19 related stress. We've talked about a few tips and tricks for things you can do to help cope with stress or reduce some of that negative impact. And those are things that you can do on your own. For some people, it's really impacted them more and they may need support in coping. And there's nothing wrong with that. This really is a stressful time. And for anybody who does feel like, kind of the self-help things or these tips are not enough, I really encourage you to seek out support where you can. You can do that in a variety of ways. There's counseling services. A lot of times if you get in touch with your senior center or community center, they can direct you and give you referrals. I recognize with health insurance and costs and all of that, it can be difficult to find opportunities, but probably, a local center or social worker can really help you find out what's available to you. I see a question in the chat box about how do you know when? And I'm assuming that's how you know when kind of the self-help stuff is not enough and you might need further support. I would say if you really find that despite trying to use some of these things, that the stress is really impacting your day-to-day life in terms of, again, still becoming more isolated or not being able to kind of carry out the day-to-day functions because you're so stressed out. At those times, I would say, that's a time you might start reaching out. Another good place to ask for referrals or ideas is your primary care doctor. They might be able to refer you to something. For some people, if you're experiencing anxiety or depression, medications may work. For other people, psychotherapy or counseling may work. It's really on an individualized basis. So these last couple of slides, I'm going to tell you about one of the kinds of treatments that we research, which is called problem-solving therapy. Now, people may experience a variety of problems related to COVID-19 or not related to COVID-19. Social problems, health problems, financial, emotional. There's a lot of things that people may struggle to cope with. And problem-solving therapy is a type of therapy that you might do with a professional, like a counselor or a therapist, to help you learn some really useful skills that are applicable to addressing any type of problem. So this is a really nice therapy where, once you learn it, it can really help you cope with a variety of different types of stressors. And so what problem-solving therapy does is it gives you skills to cope with stress for more effective problem solving. And it does this in a variety of ways. First, it addresses some of the barriers that can get in the way of problem solving. So that can be things like negative emotion. It's harder to problem solve when you feel really anxious or really depressed. It helps with teaching skills for when you feel really overwhelmed. If you've got a lot of things going through your mind at any one point, it's really hard to effectively focus and problem solve on one of them. And it also helps with feelings of hopelessness. And then problem solving therapy, once those barriers are addressed, then gives you really concrete step-by-step tools for how to problem solve effectively. And what we often find is people are good in different areas. And it's just, we identify areas where they can really strengthen and build on what they're already good at to really enhance that problem solving and reduce stress. And it has a lot of strong evidence with older adults, with depression. And this says my work here. This is Dr. Sherry Boudreau's work with anxiety. As well as suicidal thinking in older adults. There's some evidence that it's helpful with that too. So this is just one example of something that a professional might do with you. There are other options as well, and other things out there that might work for you. I mentioned that James and I work on this research study at the VA. Unfortunately, this is only open to veterans. It is open to veterans whether or not they're VA enrolled. So if you are a veteran you feel like you might want some help with stress, we offer free treatment through this study. And we also even pay you for completing the assessment portions of the study. So you can feel free to contact us. It's that 650 number with the extension at the bottom, and we'll screen and see if you're eligible. And we can also provide referrals if you're not eligible for this study of where else you might receive help. If you're not a veteran or this isn't relevant to you, you might keep an eye out or even call around. If you know of any like university research centers or university mental health centers or community research centers, because a lot of times clinical trials like this will offer a free treatment. And so that might be a resource if finances or paying for treatment is a barrier to that. So that's everything that I really wanted to make sure I covered today. I do want to acknowledge all of these collaborators in that research project, as well as other research that's gone into this presentation. Dr. Sherry Boudreau, who really runs the show with the study and was a huge part of putting together this presentation. James for being here and helping with this, as well as the other members of our lab. This is my contact information here, this julie.lutz@va.gov, if you have any questions going forward. But it looks like we have maybe a few minutes here for any questions or comments. So feel free to put them in the chat box or unmute yourself at this point.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lutz. This is wonderful information.
Yeah, I hope this was helpful. And like I say, let me know if anybody has questions going forward. Yeah, and thank you all for attending virtually.
Thank you.
Yeah, and everybody have a good holiday and a good new year.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.